Welcome to Cinema Convos. This is the show where we bring guests with different tastes in film to have a meaningful discussion about the art of cinema. I'm your host, Yash, and I'm here with our special guest, Jonathan. And today we're discussing the film The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King from 2003, which was written by Fran Walsh, Philippa Boyens, and Peter Jackson, and directed by Peter Jackson. And it is starring Elijah Wood, Sean Astin, Orlando Bloom, and Ian McKellen. The movie is about Gandalf and Aragorn leading the world of men against Sauron's army to draw his gaze from Frodo and Sam as they approach Mount Doom with the One Ring. Before we get started, this is a quick spoiler warning about really this whole series. If you have not seen these movies, recommend not listening to this until you have watched them. And with that, I'd like to ask Jonathan our first question, which is, what's your first memory or best memory with this movie?
Oh, first memory. I don't know if it'd be a best memory, but what really sticks out to me on this one is getting to see Smeagol whenever he was a hobbit, and then seeing him, I think it's his cousin Deagle, that he kills in the beginning there, and how they actually find the ring. You get to see, it's always referenced. You see throughout the first two movies the grabbing of the ring by someone out of the riverbed after, I think it's Isildur, ultimately dies, and it betrays him, right? And to see that all come together is really neat. After the first two movies, so that's I think what really sticks out to me. Though there's a lot. That sticks out to me on it as well. But I think just that start is really good. And I think Lord of the Rings overall does a really good job starting off their movies to grip you, get you in there.
For sure. I mean, the intro scene in this movie is actually like super dark and kind of terrifying when you compare it to a lot of other like fantasy movies. But I love that about it. With me, my initial experience with Lord of the Rings, and I've told you this, is I've only seen the extended versions. And I saw them like way after they were like the first Hobbit was on the way when I first saw Lord of the Rings, like
Yeah.
2013, 2014. I'd heard about Lord of the Rings for so long. And I was always a Harry Potter kid growing up, and everyone's like, you gotta watch Lord of the Rings. That's like the OG fantasy, story. And I watched the whole set that year. And I just rewatched the whole series again like last year. I had not seen it since then. And yeah, I don't know. I've always loved Return of the King. I still think it's one of my favorite movies. What I think is so interesting about this series is like you really have like if you're gonna watch them, you have to watch like all of them. Like they're all one big story. It's not like each individual chapter has its own story. It's like a continuation of the last one, and I think that's really cool. But I mean, my first memory was back in 2013. My best memory is just anytime I watch it, it's a great movie because I've already
Yeah.
watched the other two that precede it. And yeah, I don't have like a childhood growing up with this movie. I didn't see them in the theaters. I saw the second and third Hobbit in the theaters, but that's a whole other thing we'll get into later on in the episode.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Every once in a while, this is a bit of an aside, but keep an eye out. Sometimes local theaters, I know, they'll actually have special showings of the Lord of the Rings movies. I don't know if they're the extended editions, but that you can actually pay usually a reduced rate and go in to see. And it's if you ever want to catch it in theater, like I didn't have the chance to catch them in theater originally either, so but did get to do something like that. That's a really fun experience.
I know you mentioned Gollum. Aren't they making a game or a series like just about Gollum like pretty soon?
Really? Is that Amazon that's doing that? I know I think what are they spending? They're spending, I feel like it's it's not billions of dollars on the series, but I saw
Yeah,
something about Amazon spending a lot of money
there is
on
a
this.
spin-off series like on the way. I'm pretty sure. I just forgot. I haven't checked in on it in a while.
Okay. Is that the one that's the Smeagol Gollum series?
I don't know if it's a series, but I heard it might be a game, so that's why I'm not really
Oh, interesting.
sure. Anyways, we'll get
Interesting.
into that.
Yeah.
But as far as this movie goes, what are some of your favorite aspects of this particular movie?
I think that they do a very good job, and this applies across the board for Lord of the Rings. You have, and I can't bring up examples off the top of my head of other movie series or just individual movies that don't do a good job of this. But sometimes whenever you have multiple stories in a movie, I think because you watch Lord of the Rings and you have all these multiple stories going on, right? But it all centers around, and this is why, in my opinion, it works. It all centers around the central idea of, okay, we're trying to destroy Sauron were trying to destroy the One Ring, and so all of those stories, everyone has ultimately the same goal, right? To some extent, even um, and the bad guys, of course, doing the opposite, right? But it works in that way, and I think that some movies where you have all these multiple stories going on, that's how you tie them together. I think Lord of the Rings really does that well, and it feels very cohesive. So that for me is one of the big things that sticks out about it. But also, it just holds up really well to CG today. The CG that they use in newer movies today, but the practical effects they used are why I think that it holds up so well. The CG was pretty good too, for sure. Nothing on the screen really sticks out to you as, hey, this is going to pull me out of the moment, right? Because it looks pretty real, but also just the practical effects using a large number of cast members for the orcs or the Uruk-hai or the Rohirrim, right? It really does a very good job of keeping you in the moment, and it holds up 21 years later, or maybe it was made in 2003, so 18 years later, right? And so I think that's what sticks out to me, and it just really does a good job of that.
Right now! Right now! Right! Right for ruin and the world's ending!
Yeah, I was actually going to bring up the special effects as well. I think that's a really good point because, like you said, they use a lot of practical effects in these movies, and I think part of it is just because of the time they were made, early 2000s, and I think it's better for the movie as far as how it's going to age. The Hobbit movies, I like them. I don't love them. I've never read the books, to be fair. I've heard they did like The Hobbit has no place being like 2.5 hour movies, from what I've heard. But what I like about Lord of the Rings is I think, yeah, like it feels like you're in the world. When I watch the Hobbit movies, I'm watching a movie because it feels fake, right? But
Mhm.
in Lord of the Rings, I'm like, no, like those are orcs and they're real orcs, and there's like a real sense of danger throughout the movie. And even when they use CG, like for like Smeagol or Gollum, it looks very convincing and real. And the attention to the visual effects and like the makeup and the costumes, it all works really well. Yeah. So the visual effects, and also like you mentioned, it's a great trilogy, right? And this is my opinion, but I think this is a trilogy which every movie gets better. At least for the way I see it. I know there's a little bit of contention with like Two Towers Fellowship. People have different views on those two, but the unanimous consensus tends to be Return of the King is the best because it's like a great finale that brings everything together in a truly epic way. And I love that it's a good, like, the third movie is make or break for any trilogy. um Many trilogies have fallen to the trap of being like, first one's great, second one's okay, and then the third one is like kind of 50-50. You can think of so many, I mean, like The Matrix, or there's so many examples.
New Star Wars movies, in my
Spider-Man,
opinion.
the original, yeah, this new Star Wars movie is a great example. And like, that's, we bring up Star Wars, right? But in the prequel trilogy, I think what saves that trilogy is a good third chapter. So like, it's so important that the third chapter like is good, or you'll remember the series kind of as a disappointment, at least in my opinion.
Hmm.
um but yeah, speaking of trilogies, The Hobbit wasn't always supposed to be a trilogy. It kind of developed that way, right? If I'm correct. And I wanted to go ahead and ask you, since you brought it up so much, what are your thoughts on the Hobbit movies and like how they compare to this series?
Yeah, that's a good question. Uh, the Hobbit, I think the biggest word, one, if I were to describe the series in one word, it'd be disappointed. For me personally, it's not necessarily Peter Jackson's fault. It was more, to my understanding, he was brought in and out of it, maybe just into it late, and he was very rushed by the studio. So really, it's the studio's fault, which seems to be the case in a lot of series and movies these days. Um,
100%. I mean, anything Zack Snyder has made has a director's cut, and there's a reason for that. Studio
yeah.
interference.
Yeah, another one I could think of with a director's cut, I guess, that really is a very different movie is I don't know if you've seen Kingdom of Heaven, but the
Only the
original.
theatrical cut, actually. And I've
There you
heard
go.
it's
Yeah,
like so much worse than the extended cut. From I
yeah.
haven't seen I haven't found it yet. I need to find a place to watch it.
There's so much more intricacy to the plot and whatnot, historical issues aside. But anyway, I guess we'll keep it focused
Yeah.
on Lord of the Rings.
No,
But
I mean Ridley Scott is also another champion of director's cuts. I mean, look at Blade Runner. Like it has
sure,
like 20 cuts or whatever.
yeah, yeah.
I've seen the
But
final cut in that one. That's the only one
okay,
I've seen. I've heard that's like one of the best ones.
I might have seen the final cut on the original Blade Runner. I think that might have been the only way I've seen that movie. I've seen it one time and it was good. Um,
Yeah.
but in terms of The Hobbit, one of the things that really sticks out to me in The Hobbit is the especially in the third movie, it just gets a little goofy. A lot of the stuff is they really tried to stretch it out over three movies because it's a child's book. It's one book. It's not long. It's a
Yeah.
very easy read,
And I've
and
heard
they
like the battle is like a couple pages in the book. Like it's like the whole plot of the third movie is like a very small part of the book. So
Mhm.
it's very stretched out. Yeah, that's what happens a lot when things are based on something, particularly books. This happens with TV shows a lot. I mean, look at Game of Thrones, just another
Mhm.
fantasy story. They were pretty set. I haven't read the books, but from what I've heard, they really deviate at one point, and the series takes a hit for it because they don't have source material to go off of. We all saw the monstrosity that was season 8 of Game of Thrones, and it's because the writers were like, well, let's just wing it, let's just do our own thing. And you know, I think it's that's why Lord of the Rings works well because it's three movies based on three books, so there's enough material there to make these like epic long movies.
Parasites. Did he say parasites? Yeah, we don't have parasites. You have parasites. That's what you're talking about, Manny. I've got parasites as big as my arm. Mine are the biggest parasites. I've got huge parasites.
One thing I like about Peter Jackson, I mean, he's a very innovative guy. I know with The Hobbit, he tried something with high frame rate and all that. I didn't watch it in the theater, but I heard it was a little bit distracting, but he does try to do new things. I did see his documentary from 2 or 3 years ago, They Shall Not Grow Old, where he like brought back World War I footage and like remastered it, which is really neat. As someone who's not really like a history buff, I feel like you would really enjoy that movie, Jonathan. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, he's made Lord of the Rings is what he's most known for, like 100%. But there was the King Kong remake that he made not long after this, which I really loved, because it was, in my opinion, like you watch clips of the old King Kong and you're like, okay, this could use a remake, right? This doesn't age that well, just like special effects.
Sure.
And I think he's a guy who knows his way around CGI. So in The Hobbit, I don't think it's like the effects are still good,
Mhm.
but they are like, because they have CGI, they just use it for everything, and that can be distracting. And like you said, like it's a children's book and it's dragged into not only three movies but three like 2.5+ hour movies, super long. And I rewatched the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit series right after, like all in like the same couple of weeks, so you can notice the difference in quality for sure.
And I think memorable characters too being a big difference between The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings, the original Lord of the Rings trilogy. I can't name the dwarves, the dwarves in the Hobbit. I can't. I don't really. They're all kind of the same. One of them wears a funny hat. Other one of them's obese. One of and eats all the things, and that's his whole personality. There's not really any in-depth
Right.
character building compared to Lord of the Rings, where especially in the extended edition. I mean, in one movie, Boromir, whenever again, you already announced spoilers, but I hope everyone's seen it by now. They've had 20
No,
years. We're okay, right?
please
But
please
whenever
talk about plot points, spoilers. This is a spoiler full full conversation.
There you go. Yeah. Okay. Good. And whenever he's dying at the end, so in the extended edition, he's talking to Aragorn. He kind of the corruption of the ring sort of removed from him at that point, and it's genuinely sad, and you feel for the guy, and you feel for Aragorn, and it's a very emotional scene. It's only been one movie, and you really care about this character. I even find myself later on, and then I think the second movie. There's a lot of referencing to Boromir, of course, with his brother Faramir and the Steward of Gondor, and his name's escaping me right now. But it's just you wish that he was actually there. If one of those dwarves had died, I wouldn't really care, and that might sound a little callous, but it's just because they didn't develop the character well enough. Where in Lord of the Rings, every single member of the Fellowship you genuinely care about, and other characters as well. So I think
For
that he does
sure.
a much better job there. Again, I don't think it's Peter Jackson's fault.
Right.
It's more studio based and just not giving him enough time.
For sure. And I agree with you in that, like in The Hobbit, I don't care as much about all the characters, and I know Bilbo is going to survive because of Lord of the Rings. So like the tension is not quite there that I feel watching Lord of the Rings like the first time, where like anyone could die, and there's more stakes. But I think you're right. Like the dwarves, they all have like one gimmick, and like that's their thing. Like there's the leader, there's the one that eats a lot, there's the one that's like the wise old man. Like it's all just like archetypes of like different types of characters put into a group. And I totally agree with you there. In terms of favorite characters, what Gollum is, Andy Serkis is completely brilliant as Gollum, in my opinion. I think he is frequently overlooked for his work as a motion capture artist. I mean, the Planet of the Apes trilogy, him as Caesar and as Gollum, I think he's shown that like acting can go so much beyond just like what we think of it conventionally. I would say my favorite character to watch is Gollum, but I love Frodo and Sam. I love their friendship. I think everyone needs a Sam Gamgee like in their life, no matter who you are, someone who's loyal and there for you till the end. But yeah, watching Fellowship of the Ring again after I've already seen the whole series, I used to think Fellowship was kind of a boring movie initially, but knowing that what's going to happen in the series, I realized like this isn't my favorite Lord of the Rings movie, but it is a very solid foundation of these characters that will cause me to care like once this is over, beyond to the next movie.
Yeah, I agree. In terms of my favorite character, I mean, and to go off, I guess what you were saying there, yeah, that's my thought too. It's easy, it's easy to say the third movie is maybe the favorite, but I think that the first movie shows a very good development of maturing and in a lot of the characters. I think Sam's pretty, like you said, pretty steady throughout, but Frodo certainly undergoes quite a bit of change. Pippin and Merry mature quite a lot, and you can see the difference between them. I think that's pretty whenever they actually split off. I believe it's in the second movie. I think it's the second movie. Whenever one of them, I believe it's Pippin rides off with Gandalf after looking into the Palantir Ball.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so you just see such a good character development there. But favorite characters, I think Gandalf,
Gandalf for sure is
for
included.
me is excellent. Yeah, I think most people
awesome
probably
character.
like Aragorn. I really do like Boromir a lot too. I think Sean Bean, the ongoing joke is he dies in every single movie.
Right,
It seems
Sean.
like.
Yeah, that's not even a spoiler. That's just
Yeah.
gonna happen. If Sean Bean's in
Yeah.
a movie, don't get attached to him. Like,
Uh-huh.
he's gonna be offed eventually.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but
yeah.
I like Boromir and Faramir. Their story, like I think what you said, right? They take out a lot of stuff from the extended version and the theatrical versions, and I really like that backstory stuff that they include. I think it adds so much depth to their character, and you realize how like tragic their life truly is. With like their father and everything, like the political drama they're dealing with. But what's interesting is I've only seen the extended versions, right? And from what you and many others have told me, it's like, all right, like you're set. You don't have to watch theatrical version. You watch the best version of the movie, which I think is so interesting because they're already considered great movies. I mean, what blows me away about this movie isn't the scene where Saruman like dies not in the theatrical version, like it's just left out. Like right at the beginning when they confront him.
Oh, the whole beginning. I think that's in there.
Okay.
There might be some small cuts in there that aren't a part, but I think it's included
Okay.
in the original cut. But yeah, I want to say it's included. I want to say it's included.
Okay. I guess what are your overall thoughts on extended version theatrical versus the theatrical? Since
I
you've
think,
seen all of it.
yeah, I actually watched the theatrical version fairly recently, up until about midway through the third movie, and then said, you know what, can't, need to go back and watch the extended versions. And what you find, especially if you're watching it with someone that hasn't seen it before, I'm a bit of a Lord of the Rings nerd to some extent, not by any means someone that could do one of those 40-minute YouTube videos describing the lore, but in terms of the movies themselves. I think the biggest thing that you notice is that you want to say to the person watching with you, well, you need to see this scene. Let's look it up on YouTube. If you're watching the theatrical version, you need to see this scene. This adds so much context to what's going on. Let's look up the theatrical. Let's look up the scene on YouTube real quick so we can watch that. Let's pause the movie, watch that scene, then we'll go back to the movie. And it takes them out of it, but it also provides a lot of really important context. You know, Actually, so did you say Saruman earlier? I know that the scene that you might be talking about
Yeah,
is
I said
Saruman,
Saruman, not
whenever
Sauron,
mhm.
Saruman.
So at the beginning
Yeah,
of yeah, it's confusing, right? I don't know why
they're
Tolkien
so
took that
similar.
route, but Sauron and Saruman.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so the way I remember those is just whenever I think of the characters quoting it, and I know whenever Gandalf in the first, whenever they're deciding to go over the mines of Moria or not, they're trying to take the pass of whatever it's called in the mountains. He goes, "It's Saruman," and so I remember, and he's up there with his staff, sending the bad weather. So that's how I remember Saruman. But there is a missing scene there, and that was one of the ones I had to go to YouTube. Hey, hold on, we're going to go to YouTube, watch this scene. It's super important with Wormtongue and Saruman up there, because it's completely cut out. It just opens with Treebeard says, "Oh, the filth of Saruman is washing away," and you see his boots, and you just miss all this context about why they're really even there. Were they just there for the Palantir? Why'd they ride all this way? Because they wanted, in the extended edition, right? They wanted to get information from Saruman because he was so deep, and he was in very close counsel with Sauron, right? And so that's completely missing, and it's not Peter Jackson's fault. That's the studio and time restrictions, because we have this. This brings me to another small thing. I really appreciate whenever movies look at their audience and basically give their audience the benefit of the doubt that they're intelligent, and can make and are
Absolutely.
willing to sit around for something they're invested in.
Yeah.
I think movies would be better in general if they were made more to, hey, you know what, we're not trying to please everyone here. We're going to please a certain group of people, and
Mhm.
then everyone else will kind of come on board eventually. But that doesn't make the most money, right?
The
I
two
think.
big things that studios go for, at least from what I've observed, is do not make it obscenely long. People don't like that. They want to make money, right? I don't agree with this, but it's like the length of the movie they control, and they want to make, like, if it's too violent, can we tone it down? Can we make it reach a bigger audience? Just an example, like the Venom movie a few years back
Mm,
was not R-rated, and you can tell like a lot of cuts have been made to like clean this movie up so I can like, so like kids can watch it basically, right? But I think you bring up a really good point about context. The like when people tell me that that scene with Saruman is like not in the original version, I'm genuinely shocked, because I'm like, I can't imagine that not being in the movie. It leads to the whole what's coming next with that group of characters. And also it gives closure to Saruman as a villain, because he was the villain of the Two Towers, really.
hmm
Um, but a very recent example is Zack Snyder's Justice League that just came out a few months ago. Um,
I saw the director's cut of that. So.
yeah, the Snyder Cut, that's been like, release the Snyder Cut's been like one of the most popular hashtags for like years. But Justice League, you can really feel in the extended version, you can really feel at least some care for the characters. There's backstories, there's context, and you can see how much this, like, well, that was a whole different thing, right? Because Zack Snyder had to step down for a family tragedy, and the
Mm,
studio was like, well, we still want the movie, we don't care about you. And that's how ruthless studios can be, unfortunately. And it's really sad, but it's at least he got to make his true vision. And whenever there's a director's cut, that for any movie that's by like a director that's known for making these kind of cuts, like Peter Jackson, Ridley Scott, even Zack Snyder to an extent, like, I'm curious to see if there's a difference, because so many times I'll hear like the extended version adds very few scenes, but it makes all the difference in like how you interpret the story.
sure. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And
Mhm.
to provide an example, I guess, if you don't mind, of what I mean by
Oh, go for it. Yeah.
kind of giving your audience the benefit of the doubt and saying, hey, you know what, if I have some more subtle things in this movie, it'll eventually come through. Even if it requires some analysis by them, it's more subtle. It's a more intelligent movie. I think No Country for Old Men is a very good example of that by the Coen brothers. Um, a part of that that really sticks out if you watch throughout the movie. Um, Anton, I think how you
I've
say his
seen
name is.
it, so go for it.
Sure, yeah, Anton Chigurh. So that's good that you've seen it. Anton Chigurh, he throughout the movie he's very concerned about his boots. Anytime he kills someone, whenever he kills the I think it's a ranger, the guy from Vietnam with the hat. It's Woody Harrelson's character. He puts his boots up on the bed. He whenever he's going into the motel room, he takes his boots off before doing so, both to be quiet but also not to get them bloody. At the very end, whenever he kills the main character, and I can't even remember his name now, but sort of the main character. It's weird how they do that. They just kill him abruptly, right? Whenever he goes in to kill his wife, you don't know that if you're not paying attention, you might say, "Hey, did he leave her? Did he not kill her?" Because she kind of begs for her life, and it's very sad. But whenever he comes out, if you're watching, it's a very far back shot. It's a wide shot. He wipes his boots off, and then there's no shot heard on anything. And so if for an audience that's paying attention, you're gonna say, going off of what he did previously, he killed her. So that's just an example of directors kind of allowing their audience to think a little on a movie, right? Not make an
For sure.
announcement in the middle of a scene, right? Oh, this is the
No,
so
for
and so
sure.
and stuff, right?
For
But
sure.
anyway,
You know how this is gonna turn out, don't you?
Nope.
I think you do. So this is what I'll offer. You bring me the money and I'll let her go. Otherwise, she's accountable. The same as you. That's the best deal you're gonna get. I won't tell you can save yourself, because you can't.
I mean, directors, one thing you learn, and regardless of how artistic the movie is, every single frame and scene is very intentional. Every detail of it is usually thought out to like a very in-depth degree. So you notice little things like that, right? And I think that's why it's so good to like revisit movies too and watch them again, because you will pick up on something you didn't the first time. Even if it's an awful movie, you will find something you're like, oh, it's kind of cool they did that. I've only watched the series like twice because they're so long, and I'm always like, if I'm gonna start it,
oh
I'm
yeah.
gonna finish it. So, but yeah, I totally see what you're saying about that. Have you read the books for Lord of the Rings?
I haven't yet. I've read The Hobbit
Okay.
several times. It's on the list of right now. I'm actually reading through the Dune series, which is a bit of
Ooh,
a
yeah,
task. Really, some pretty long books. Nothing too crazy if you're a really serious reader. I'd kind of call myself a mid-tier reader, but they definitely require thought. And just going off the trailer for the new Dune, it emphasizes he's kissing his. He's kissing. I'm not going to ruin anything. He's kissing, and there's a lot of love scenes just in the trailer between him and that woman that you see in there. And that is a very small part of the first book, which is about a 900-page book, depending on what version and print version you have. I have the smaller version, but it it's such a small portion, and for them to emphasize it that much in the trailer and not get into what a lot of the book is about, I wonder if they're just trying to bring the audience in. They're going to stick to the source material, which I feel like Lord of the Rings does a very good job of that, to tie it back in. Um, they do a very good job, I think, of sticking to the source material. That I think there's only probably about 15 minutes or so of actual lines from the books themselves. But in terms of the main content, I think that overall, other than Aragorn and the elf woman's name, it's escaping me right now. Eowyn. I think it's Eowyn. Um, Other than their love story, which is not a big portion of the books themselves, I've heard. Apparently, they do. Peter Jackson does a very good job of actually staying on task and getting what's important in there in a lot of the pivotal scenes. I know Tom Bombadil, for example, is not included, which is some weird character I really don't know a lot about. But anyway, there's. I think they do a good job in Lord of the Rings.
I mean, with movies, they're gonna play up the romance, even if there's not that much of a part of it in the book, because since like the dawn of cinema, like romance has been like an element of film, and
It
I
sells.
I mean, it's also, you bring up a good point, because it's not always necessary to the story. You don't need a romance angle just to keep me interested. It works in Lord of the Rings. I like the romance elements. It's not too overbearing. But with Dune, what's interesting is I haven't read I haven't read the Lord of the Rings books, so I can't compare these movies to at all, really. But with Dune, it's supposed to be like a really famous sci-fi novel, right? And they have made a movie in the 80s, and I heard it's kind of a like a flop almost. Like it's not a very
Right.
successful movie. And what's interesting is that this brings up a whole topic about what movies should be remade. And I think movies that weren't successful the first time around, you should remake. They should never remake Lord of the Rings. That's just a bad idea. You should not
Mhm.
even touch Lord of the Rings. It's timeless. But Dune, I'm interested because it's directed by Denis Villeneuve. I don't know if you follow some of his films. He did Blade Runner, Arrival, Prisoners, Sicario. Like really, really talented, new talent. Great director. So I think mostly because of that, I'm interested for Dune. Because I have no ties to the source material, but I'm curious to see if with these adaptation movies that are based on a book, it's hard to find the happy medium where you're pleasing just people who are there to watch the movie versus like diehard fans of the books.
Mhm.
And you'll see so many movies throughout history where people will say the book is better because that's the case. That's just like it's very hard not to. Um, Lord of the Rings, from what I've heard, is a great adaptation. And a good adaptation is not following it scene for scene, right? Like I don't think that's a good adaptation because there are two different mediums of entertainment. A movie should focus on the big points, the characters. I think the Harry Potter series is completely beautiful adaptation. And they didn't keep everything. They can't. I mean, they'd have to make a whole series of it, like to get everything. But an
Right.
example of a book that's nothing like the movie, just based on what I've heard, The Shining. Stephen King hates The Shining, notoriously, like famously hates the movie The Shining, because he doesn't feel like it captures what his book's about. But it's one of the most successful horror movies of all time. So, it's interesting to have that balancing act of creating a good book adaptation.
No, no, go easy on the wee one. His father's gonna go crazy and chop them all into haggis.
What's haggis?
Boy, you read my thoughts. You've got the shinin.
You mean shining?
Shh, you wanna get sued?
And I think one big part of it, real quick, is obviously these movies were made like, I mean, J.R.R. Tolkien like probably died a while back before these were made, right? They didn't really have him as a resource, but a lot of these movies that I'm liking that are based on books is when the author of the book is directly involved with the movie in some way. Like sometimes they'll write the script, sometimes they'll even direct it, and I've seen that creates a better finished product. I don't think they should do those things alone. They should have like feedback from other people, unless they're like just talented at writing everything, which they can be. Because when it comes to, and this is another tangent I just remembered, but the Fantastic Beasts movies aren't working as well, and the reason is because J.K. Rowling is a good author of books, but she's not having the same gift for screenwriting is not the same thing at all. And she writes the scripts for those movies because she's very detailed and detail oriented. She describes every scene so thoroughly in the books, and in a movie, it can be a pretty boring movie if that's the case. So that's my whole little author's writing tangent.
No, I mean, no, that makes sense. I think it is interesting to have the writer involved. And the Harry Potter original, I guess, what would you call it? I think there's 7 books. I could be wrong.
Yeah, 7
Um,
books, 8 movies.
8 movies, right? Because they split the Deathly Hallows off. Does a very good job. I know, having read the books recently, somewhat recent, actually it was about 2 years ago, but I know there's
Yeah.
several important parts that are missing, but not enough to where it's bad, right? And
Like they focus on the most important stuff in the movies for
mhm,
sure. Like the stuff
yeah,
they take out, like like I like that, but also I see why they took it out. It makes
yeah,
sense.
right. The whole backstory with Dumbledore and his
Mhm.
sister, and then I think
Well,
the
Voldemort's
brother,
backstory is way more in depth than Half Blood Prince. Like there's a lot more.
which I really enjoyed in the
Yeah,
books.
yeah, the
Yeah, but
books are great.
yeah, can you fit that into a movie that's already pretty long? Probably not. In order to, I mean, the
Yeah,
studio probably won't let you, right? No, I think they did a very good
yeah.
job,
I mean,
for
Order of the
sure.
Phoenix, which is one of my favorite. It's actually one of my favorite Harry Potter movies and one of my least favorite books actually in the series because it's the longest book and the shortest movie. And the book, I feel like it's a popular book. I mean, the whole series is iconic, but Order of the Phoenix for me it drags so much in the beginning, and the movie is like so tightly paced. Like it just gets to the meat of the story really quickly and really effectively.
Hmm.
So that's an example of an adaptation where they took out a lot of stuff, but I think it worked for the better.
Sure, sure.
If you've ever read Holes growing up, Holes is a pitch perfect like adaptation of the book, except like the main character is not fat in the movie. Like that's the only difference.
Oh.
um, because it's Shia
Yeah.
LaBeouf. So
I
that's like
saw the movie. I haven't read the book. I didn't realize it was a book.
yeah, Holes is it's scene for scene, like just like the book.
Oh yeah.
One of those kind of examples that people forget about, but
Mm.
it's a really good adaptation.
I'd say a true, actually two examples, and one I've already mentioned. Having read No Country for Old Men, the
Mm,
movie is a very close, almost. It's a very, very close adaptation of the book. The book's excellent. True
that's
Grit as well. The new. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
that's the I was gonna say that's Cormac McCarthy's the author of that
It
one.
is.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay.
I believe so. He also authored The Road, which I haven't seen that movie for a while. But anyway, that's kind of a bleak movie. That's
I
probably why
haven't seen
people
that.
don't like
I
it.
mean, I haven't seen the movie either.
Yeah, yeah. We see a Viggo Mortensen who played Aragorn. He actually is in that as well as the
Viggo
dad of the son.
Mortensen, like while we're talking about actors, real quick, he has range. That guy has been in so many different movies. He just never looks the same.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
It's just so. Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I think he's a very underrated actor. Another example though, the new version of True Grit, which is actually one of my favorite movies. A lot of it because of it's cleverly written. The dialogue's great. It's also authentic as best as they could to the era, which I think is really interesting. There aren't contractions in it, so they say "do not" instead of "don't," as for example. But it's very, very close to the book as well. From if I remember correctly, having read both those books, and a very good book. But it's you can almost watch the movie in your head while you're reading the book truly, which is sort of a unique thing to be able to do. So
Yeah, for
two
sure.
examples I can think of where they did that.
I mean, sometimes they get it right. There's sometimes it's all about making the right changes, and if you don't change anything too major, usually you can make at least an okay movie because the source
Sure.
material is there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I've seen far more. I've seen many book adaptations. I mean, compared to like video game adaptations, like book adaptations definitely have the lead in
Oh
terms
yeah.
of good movies.
I would. Yeah, I agree with that. I'd agree with
Um,
that.
so okay, this is most, at least in my opinion, this is most definitely a fantasy movie. Um, would that be the genre you would describe it as? And if so, what are some of your other favorite fantasy stories?
Ooh. I'd definitely say it's fantasy. Yeah, that'd be my take on it, having seen it a few times. Ooh, other favorite fantasy stories, man. I mean, Harry Potter I think would fall under the fantasy category. Um, is definitely in there. Um, man, I'm trying to almost having to think of the book versions that I've read of some of these in
Yeah,
terms of
I
fantasy
mean,
overall. What about yourself?
I mean, Harry Potter it's the series I fell in love with as a kid, and big part of why I love movies to the extent I do today. As far as even like as why I love reading so much is a big part of that is because of those. But I think the reason we're having a hard time thinking about these is because you can compare almost any fantasy movie or show to like Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter because they're the two like that just kind of redefine the genre. I mean, this is a fantasy movie that won 11 Oscars. It's tied with two other movies to winning the most Oscars out of any movie,
Mm,
which is it's insane because like the Academy, like they've made their mistakes. They've picked movies that I think are not that good. They've made underrated movies or overrated movies. But with Lord of the Rings, it's like when this movie came out, it was so unanimous. Like this is the best movie of the year. Like fans, critics, everyone just rallied around this movie. Like this is an incredible piece of cinema. And I think that's the only time I can think of where a fantasy movie has been recognized to that extent, which I think is great.
yeah.
I think you should, one thing the Oscars are known for are like excluding horror movies. Silence of the Lambs is like the only one that won Best Picture,
Mm.
but they frequently like forget to nominate movies from like these sci-fi, fantasy, outside of like visual effects and like costume design and those kind of things. They overlook a lot of movies, in my opinion, because of that stigma, I guess, that they're not art to them.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think there's a lot of really underrated movies out there like that. And I don't know it's not fantasy. I think it'd fall under sci-fi, but I've kind of have a bit about me here. I kind of have a thing for movies that really aren't that great, but are still really enjoyable to watch. A few of
For
those
sure.
I don't say Snow. Now, the first one of these I'm going to list, it definitely is one that I think is a good movie and at the same time enjoyable to watch. But Snowpiercer,
That picture is
very
great,
good.
dude.
Yeah, a very good movie. Sci-fi though, I think is what you'd call that one. And another one. So several I can think. I think this one's a little strange too. But League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, I think that could probably fall under fantasy. That's a bit of a campy kind of bad CG movie, but it's just fun to watch.
Yeah.
Sunlight, I think it's called. Same actor that plays Captain America and the main character in Snowpiercer's in
Hmm.
that. Sci-fi once again, but very underrated. Most people haven't seen it.
Mhm.
And there's just
I've
Chronicles
s-
of Riddick, not that great of movies really, but
yeah,
enjoyable to kind of watch and just kind of, hey, this is decent. It's pretty. It's a
absolutely.
unique idea. Yeah, and if you
I think a lot of times, like people assume that I'm just in it for like the art of cinema, but I love the summer season. I watch all the blockbusters when we have those. I like to have fun in movies, and I agree with you. Like there's many movies out there that have like bad ratings or reviews. I still like them. An example of a movie that I loved, like I absolutely loved, was the first Kingsman movie. When that came out, I was like, this is one of the most fun movies I've ever seen in my life. Like, and it wasn't like a masterpiece, but it's like to me, it basically was because it was so much fun. But yeah, Snowpiercer is interesting you bring up because it's directed by Bong Joon-ho, who also went on to do Parasite, and that won Best Picture. And it's interesting how like sometimes movies are overlooked, but then that filmmaker like comes out of nowhere again, and you're like, wait, he also made this movie. I think that's interesting too.
it's interesting. I didn't know that about Snowpiercer and then Parasite. Golly, that's a crazy movie. But yeah,
Yeah, Bong Joon-ho is also a genius. He's every movie you watch from him. I've seen four of his films, and they're all completely different. They're all, and two of them are in English, two of them are in Korean, and they're all still unique to what they're about. So you mentioned Viggo Mortensen. I'm personally also a big fan of, especially Sean Astin in the '80s and like Elijah Wood. I see a lot of people in this movie that I really enjoy as actors. Is there anyone else that you'd like to mention in like in terms of any of their work that they've done, or like any
oh,
movies you like from like any of these actors in this movie? Like Ian McKellen, X-Men, this example.
yeah, of course Ian McKellen's going to be in there, right? I think Christopher Lee, amazing actor, and I haven't seen a lot of his older stuff. But I mean, of course, the prequels for Star Wars, he's Count Dooku in those, of course. And I think they had to do a lot of CG for him in the third one because he was getting too old at that point. But he died, I
Mhm.
think, in the last 2 years. Very sad, very
Yeah,
big loss there. He
Christopher
was.
Lee and Ian Holm recently passed away, who plays Bilbo.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and worth mentioning, I'm gonna go on a Christopher Lee tangent here if
No,
it's
yeah, for
okay.
sure.
But before I do that, another, of course, good actor there. I'm trying to think of he plays Mr. Smith in The Matrix, but he is it Hugo Weaving? I think it's Hugo Weaving.
Yeah.
Yeah, he plays Elrond. And so he excellent actor there. He's in a lot of stuff. Very, very good actor. So one of the favorites as well. And I think he's not a main character really as much, but he does a very good job in his role for what it is in the show. But
Also, Orlando Bloom's in this movie, and
mhm.
he was doing the first Pirates of the Caribbean came out like when Lord of the Rings ended. So he was just kind of killing it at that point in time, career wise. I think he was probably making a lot of money.
Oh yeah, no doubt, no
He
doubt.
came
But
back
yeah,
as
Chris.
Legolas years later in The Hobbit.
Yeah,
Who isn't Legolas not in The Hobbit book at all?
not at all.
The whole
Neither is the
subplot
main.
is like
Yeah,
crazy.
neither is that the main character that they hate, the defiler. Is it
Mm,
it's something the defiler? I
yeah,
can't
something
remember
like
his name.
that.
He's the big white orc or goblin. He's
Mm,
not in it at all. Not even remotely a part of the whole story. So anyway, but Christopher Lee, excellent actor. He read throughout his life. He would read the Lord of the Rings books every single year religiously, all three, and so he was a bit of an aide on set as well. I think to some extent in that way. But there's an interesting scene I saw from Peter Jackson commenting. So a little bit of history on Christopher Lee. I believe he was a part of the British SAS in World War II as well, and so a very historied individual there. Uh, and so he, in the scene that we were talking about where he is killed, that is otherwise not in the theatrical version, he's up there with Worm Tongue, and he wanted Peter Jackson wanted Christopher Lee to make a certain outcry whenever he gets stabbed in the back by Wormtongue, and he by Grima Wormtongue, and whenever he told him, well, actually, what happens whenever someone gets stabbed is they more go like that, and you see him do it's the exact noise he makes in the movie, and he said, and Peter Jackson in the interview, he says he's talking to other people at that point, for the interview, he says, yeah, I didn't really want to question him on that, knowing his history, how he knew what someone sounds like when you stab him in the lung. But it was just interesting, and so that became a part of the movie because of Christopher Lee's experience.
I seem to recall that I did say to Peter, have you any idea of what kind of noise happens when somebody is stabbed in the back? And I said, well, because I do.
It's not. Ah, like that.
It's because the breath's driven out of your body.
Really strong cast in this movie, in this trilogy, overall, that just really helps it as well, I think. So just awesome cast of actors that done a really good job.
For sure. And I think the actors are able to do so well because I think the movie is very well written. It really immerses you in the world. Everything they say feels like what they would say. There's like all these languages like Elvish and like, different moments where it just really immerses you in this world, which I think the best fantasy movies or books or stories are able to do that. You're just lost in that world for a few hours. I think is really neat.
Yeah, I agree, and they put so much work into that as well. They had actual linguists there. I believe Tolkien himself came up with he was a language enthusiast, I believe, and he actually came up with the whole Elvish language. Pretty much wrote the language, and they had linguists on set. One of them recently died, actually. I don't know his name, but to help the actors actually learn the language to some extent, and pronounce things properly. And so just having that amount of work and detail put in, not only to the costumes and the sets and all of that, but also just even to the language itself, and the actors putting in that work and bringing in linguists, it just shows the amount of effort that was put into these. And I would guess if you compare the budget spent on these to today's budget that goes into certain movies, it's probably less, but just still, to me, it stands up as an absolute monument of cinema, and still easily, in my opinion at least, one of the best trilogies of movies ever made, if not the best.
For sure. I mean, all these movies are on the IMDb top 250, and this one's held its place at like number 7 for a long time, and I think it's totally deserving. So do you have a favorite scene in this movie? And if you do, why is it your favorite scene? Or you can like break it down or whatever works best for you.
Ooh, favorite scene.
And if you don't have just one, that's also totally valid answer.
Yeah. Let me think for a minute here, and if you have one, feel free to go ahead. I'm gonna think.
Well, I think not necessarily my favorite scene, but the most like jaw-dropping scene is when like they're at the mountain and Frodo just turns around and has that like evil smile on his face, and you're like, no, like he got so close and the ring like consumed him right before he destroyed it. And it's like it goes to show that how powerful this ring is, because this whole trilogy is spent like nearly 12 hours just showing you how pure-hearted Frodo is and like how much of a good person is, like why it makes such an effort to show you why like he's been chosen for this mission, because no one else can do it without being like seduced by the ring basically. And he's like right before, and you see Samwise, he's just like no. And this is like, it's such a frustrating but like also kind of an unexpected moment, to be honest. When you first watch it, you're just like, well, now what's going to happen? You're really on the edge of your seat. But I think everything from pretty much, I mean, the whole movie is like one big scene of just getting to the mountain and destroying the ring, and all the battles that take place in between. But yeah, that moment just like stands out to me as like a totally shocking, like, I don't know, jaw-dropping moment.
Yeah, that's a big one for sure. And then him, of course, then of course, kind of the shock of Gollum biting his finger off after that, which in that case, it kind of ties back into the very first movie whenever uh, they're sitting in the caves and Gandalf is talking to Frodo, and they see Smeagol come up on the ladder almost and kind of peer over, and you haven't seen Smeagol up to this point. And he says, I sense, or I feel that he still has a role to play yet, in all of this, and ultimately even though he didn't want to prevent the ring from being, he wanted to prevent the ring from being destroyed and take it for himself. Gollum did. He ultimately prevented that from happening, and allowed an opportunity for it to be destroyed ultimately by him carrying it over the side, in his glee of capturing it. Right. I think favorite scene for me, and most memorable for sure, or one of the most memorable, because of course the opening's memorable, like we mentioned early on at the beginning of this, but the cave with Shelob, however you want to say that, the spider, um, it's it's a terrifying scene, not by a horror movie standard by any means, but it certainly brings a little bit of that in, especially whenever you're kind of figuring out what's going on here. You don't really know for sure what exactly is in the cave just yet. I don't believe they say. I know Faramir mentions there's a dark horror up there, and that people disappear whenever he's warning Sam and Frodo before they set off again, from Osgiliath. But especially whenever he's caught in the web up, kind of has his arms spread open and he's trying to slash away I guess the spider's, what's that called? Webbing, I guess.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and it's pretty scary because you see the spider coming up behind, and then of course Sam fights it off in the end. But it kind of, that whole scene inside becomes a little bit claustrophobic, and you're locked in on the screen. What is going to happen here? How is he going to get out of this? And so and then another tie-in too, actually. It's kind of interesting. He's kind of given up, right? And then Gollum comes up and taunts him, and it makes him angry enough to kind of fight his way out, because almost the ring kind of takes over there. It's interesting, but
I mean,
So that'd be,
Lord of the Rings, I think if you're going to make one major observation comparing it to Harry Potter, it is much scarier and much more intense, because I watched this movie as like 15, 16-year-old maybe. And like, I wasn't like scared to like where like I couldn't watch it. Right. But like, there's some moments where like this movie's pretty violent. I think orcs look terrifying. Part of it, again, back to the visual effects and the use of makeup and all that. So yeah, I think I can totally see how like some scenes are kind of horror-esque. When you get this like finger bitten off, that's pretty violent for like, even a PG-13 movie. That's pretty out there. So I think it's a much darker tone than a lot of other fantasy movies. If I watched this movie as a kid, I would have been terrified, like 100%. I'm kind of glad I didn't, because I would have probably like gotten nightmares and stuff. But also I think, going back to how like the ring is like its own character, right? I think it ties into the main theme of the story, at least from how I interpret it, is that everyone has the capability of being consumed by the power of this ring. And I think the message is like every human being, every living thing is flawed in some way. Even the good guys or the bad guys, all of us have like a weakness. And I think that's a big theme that this movie is trying to show, at least when I watch it. But I was wondering, do you think there are any other themes in this movie that stand out to you? Because there's so many, right? There's so many different little things you could analyze. But I think the central theme is like, it is about good versus evil, but it's also about how like good and evil can easily be manipulated by something out there. In this case, it happens to be like one thing, but in general in life, everyone has like that weakness.
Yeah, no, I think that's a pretty good analysis, really, in terms of course, there's the triumph of good over evil being a central theme of it as well. I think it also sort of and this could be an incorrect interpretation, but I think it's interesting how throughout the movie, in order for them to actually accomplish what they need to accomplish and destroy the ring, it's such a narrow path that they have to walk the right path, right? And oftentimes I think in life, the doing the right thing is often the hardest thing, right? And they do the hardest thing. Faramir could have taken the ring, right? Taken it to Denethor, his father, and that would have been the end of things. And just so very close throughout. But I think, sort of, it kind of goes back to that good over evil thing, but also just how difficult it is for good to triumph over evil, right? It comes down to individuals, and a bunch of individuals trying to accomplish one thing, you can accomplish a lot. So,
well, looking at like the task they are given are so like monumentally difficult, right? And even there are people in the Fellowship who are like we don't know if you can do this, but you're our only hope, right? Like tying in Star Wars, I guess, but like you're the only hope to like get this done. And one thing I like about Fellowship of the Ring, at least the version I've seen, the extended version, right? You really get a feel for what Hobbit life is like, and you're like, these are very simple people. They just mind their own business. They're not like adventurers or like fighters in any way. And I think it adds so much later on where you're like, when you see Frodo and he's so close and he wants to give up, right? Because it's such a draining task. And he's not really willing to share his burden with Sam too, as he's like, I have to wear the ring. And it really takes a toll on them. And I think the theme of that is right. Like sometimes the things we have to do in life are a long shot, but we don't have a choice. Like we have to do it and get through it. That's the only way to move on. And I think that's a big part of this movie.
There's nothing, no veil between me and the way of fire. I can see him with my waking eyes. Then let us be rid of it. Once and for all. Come on, Mr. Frodo. I can't carry it for you. But I can carry you. Come on!
But yeah, I think it's really, there's good messages throughout the movie. I think that's why like it's resonated to this day with so many people.
Yeah, and another one I can think of is, and it's not exactly subtle. Galadriel mentions it. I think a few other mention it, but just like you mentioned, you kind of hit on it a little bit with Frodo being this simple person that nothing really special about him. But I think a central theme of the movie with that in mind is that even the most insignificant person can do amazing things. And it's a little bit cliche, right? But I think it's true.
Well, there's so many movies, especially like fantasy movies, like tying into Harry Potter. Like Harry Potter in the movies, he's like the chosen one, right? And there's all these like there's always like this element of like hyping up the main character. That's not really in Lord of the Rings. Like Frodo is consistently a simple hobbit doing this like task that the whole world depends on. And I think you're so right. Like it's a really strong theme that a simple, normal hobbit person is like doing this. So yeah, sometimes the smallest people or the most insignificant quote unquote people change the world. And I think that's a really strong message to find, especially like in a fantasy action movie. I think it's awesome that it's in there.
Yeah, I think, and I might misquote it. I'm about to, but one of the quotes that really sticks with me from the overall trilogy is, he says to Gandalf, Frodo says, I wish the ring had never come to me, and Gandalf says, something around, I think along the lines of, so do all, essentially, these are really bad times, Gandalf, etc. And then Gandalf, well, so do all who see such times, and
So the quote, this is one of my favorite movie quotes. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. I mean, that movie quote, that's one of my favorite quotes of all time, actually. I love that. I'm glad you mentioned it because it's so true, right? I mean, every single human being is given a certain amount of time on Earth, and that's the time you have to do whatever you want to do with your life. And it's sometimes the circumstances aren't ideal. Like Frodo is like, obviously like this mission kind of sucks, like low key, but all you have is the quote. Anyways, you can go on with whatever you were saying.
No, that's exactly it. And I think it might go back to J.R.R. Tolkien as well. I think he fought in World War I on the front lines in the trenches, and with that quote, it's really talking about, man, he probably had these thoughts as well. Why am I here? Why am I seeing these times? And I think a lot of people have that as well. I wish I lived then, or I wish I lived 20 years ago, or I wish, all this COVID's over. COVID's been mentioned so much, but why do I have to be here right now? Why couldn't I have, couldn't I have been born 10 years ago?
It's like the grass is always greener type of thing on the other side.
Yeah.
But
it's having that mentality of, we get to do with the time that we have, and that's been given to us, and we have to decide how we're going to use that time. And I think it's a very powerful
and that's a universal theme. Like anybody from any culture, any faith will resonate with that. I think it's very like it's a humanity, it's a human theme. It's not like any specific group. It's everyone will connect to that line, I think.
Sure.
One more thing I wanted to shout out, Lord of the Rings has one of the most iconic movie scores. I think Howard Shore was the composer. And I watched a video about it. To be honest, I don't really want to quote them because it's been a while, but they talked about how certain pieces of music are used in specific scenes that are designed to like create the same feeling in all of those scenes, right? Because they're similar, like moments of triumph and that sort of thing. Now, does the score of this movie stand out to you personally?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's almost a part. It's very much so a part of the experience. Of course, any soundtrack would be, but it really stands out. There's something to be said for music that's just in the background or using something subtle. More subtle. For example, you hear the heartbeats whenever Smeagol's killing Deagle, and the very you hear the heartbeats, and that's almost along with a bit of a score going on in the background. You hear that, and it's speeding up, and then it fades as he dies, which is a bit pretty morbid, really. It's a very morbid scene.
The general sound design captures the tone of every scene very
Mhm.
well, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think Gandalf, you can see what, especially when he's Gandalf the White, there's a central theme whenever he shines light from his staff a lot, and there's music that almost follows that throughout. It's not the same score exactly, but I think the
Mhm.
two,
But like a
whenever they're
triumphant sound, like
Mhm. Yeah,
Gandalf.
charging down the hill at
Mhm.
Helm's Deep, and then also when he comes out to save the people riding back from Osgiliath. I think it's in the third one, and shines the light to keep the Nazgul and the one of the Wraith Kings or Witch King. It's not the Witch King of Angmar, but one of the 9 individuals on those get them to go away. But that pops out there, and you're just like, oh wow, this is powerful. Almost makes goosebumps stand up on you, right? Like it
Yeah,
almost
like
inspires you to want to do something great.
the good movie scores are the ones you can listen to when they're not watching the movie and feel like you're back in the movie. And with this score, I 100% like feel it when I hear the main theme. So I think that's important to mention. Okay, cool. So obviously this movie it's a box office hit. It's a critical hit. It's an award-winning hit. There's really no argument there. Saying this movie is bad is like it's like you got to be careful who you say that around. So I wanted to ask you, this is one of my favorite movies of all time, and as a result, it's my favorite movie of 2003, like without a doubt. But looking at I have a top 10 list for every year out of the movies I've seen. 2003 was a very strong year for movies, even with this movie in play. So I want to ask you, what are some of your, if you can think of them, what are some of your favorite movies from that year? And if I can go first if you want.
Yeah, go first. I'm gonna look up the year and see in real
Okay.
time here while you go through it.
Okay. So some movies I'd like to shout out from 2003 that I've seen. There's probably some I haven't seen yet, but Finding Nemo, Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl, Mystic River, really good movie that I saw fairly recently. Clint Eastwood directed, kind of like crime drama, really good movie. It's a movie called Monster, where Charlize Theron actually won the Oscar that year for that movie, where she plays it's a real life story. Kill Bill Volume 1. I do not like Kill Bill Volume 2, actually. Kind of funny story there. But Volume 1 is one of my favorite Tarantino movies. School of Rock. And then I love Elf. Elf, I have a soft spot for it. It's just a great, fun movie.
Yeah, no, those are all great. I think the Last Samurai is one that I really like
Ooh,
with
the one
Tom
with
Cruise.
Tom Cruise. Yeah, that was
hmm
really good too. I've seen that one.
Yeah, Matrix Reloaded, of course, is a
Mhm.
good one in there. The CG does not hold up if we're going to compare it to Lord of the Rings, but
Yeah,
it's still a very enjoyable
I
movie.
like the Matrix. I like the whole series for the Matrix, but the first
Oh,
one's my favorite.
yeah. Big Fish is a good one too. It's a very
I haven't seen that one, but
it's
I've
a
heard it.
different
Mhm.
kind of movie, yeah, but it's emotional. I'd say it's an emotional type movie.
It's Tim Burton directed, I think. I want to
hmm
say.
It has Ian McKellen as one of the main characters in it.
Okay.
Tim Burton did direct it. Yeah, so it's got his unique touch on it. It's very
That
good. I've
one's
seen it
supposed to be
several
that
times.
one's supposed to be really good. On the
Yeah.
flip side, we got the 2003 Hulk, which is awful. It's the one of the most boring movies I've ever seen.
Holes came out in that year. I don't know if that's on your list, but
Oh,
second.
it's probably an honorable mention. I just
Yeah.
named some of my favorites. But the first Underworld came out that year. I just watched that whole series recently, actually.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Underworld. Yeah.
Mhm. The
Kind
first
of
one's the
falls in
best
that.
one.
Yeah, it kind of falls in that category for me of fun to watch type movies. I think another
Yeah.
one this is a very obscure movie, but I think it's a great movie. Everyone laughs when I say I really like it, but Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, I think is what it's
Oh,
called.
I just
It's
watched that one,
wacky.
but that came out like a few years ago.
Yeah, well, I want to say like 2015, but maybe it was more
Yeah.
recent than that.
I just saw it on
Um,
like HBO Max or something. That's a fun one. Came out the
yeah.
same year as Lincoln, which I thought was hilarious. Like an actual
Yeah.
biopic about Abraham Lincoln.
I remember being on a plane and seeing the option to watch both, and I said, I'm gonna watch the other. I'm gonna watch the Vampire Hunter, Vampire Slayer,
Yeah,
whatever
I
it's
mean
called.
Lincoln's good, but it's more of like a history lesson. But like Vampire Hunter is like, okay, this is he has to kill vampires. That's pretty cool.
It's entertaining and it's well acted. Some pretty decent actors in it.
Yeah,
This is interesting. I saw. Oh,
it was
sorry. Go ahead.
I was like, it was okay. Like it was fine. It was a movie called Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, and it
Yeah.
gave me what I expected.
Exactly. Yeah. Matrix Reloaded and Matrix Revolutions came out within 9 months of each other.
Mhm.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they were back to back, which is kind of was a unique thing at the time, at least. I mean, it's
Yeah.
Bruce Almighty was that year. I like that movie. It's a fun movie.
That is a funny movie.
Looking, Kangaroo Jack, and which is a movie I did like as a kid.
I always saw that one in Blockbuster in Hollywood going through. I was like, man, what is this? But
dude, I used to think it was like the funniest movie ever. Like, and I mean, it's not anymore, but it's just like a nostalgia trip.
It's you.
Yeah, it's me. Love the jacket, Charlie. It's hard to get something that fits my shoulders. Nice. How'd you know red was my favorite color?
You can talk.
And I can sing. I said a hip hop, the hippie to the hip hop, and you don't stop the rock to the bang bang boogie. Set up, jump the boogie to the rhythm of the boogie.
This is great.
Agent Cody Banks, another one I used to watch.
Sure.
2003 movie.
One of my all-time favorite movies actually came out this year, which was Master and Commander: The Far Side of the World, which
I've seen that
is,
one.
I think it's severely underrated in terms of historical naval fiction. It's outstanding. They do an excellent job. Yeah, and it's a book series, I believe, but the studios dropped it and decided not to roll with it.
Well, if they don't make money, then it's like it's hard to sway them to make a franchise.
I'll probably watch it every 2 years though. It's great.
It's a cool movie. I remember that's another movie where I felt very immersed in like the world it set up.
Yeah.
So for sure, I definitely see what you're saying.
And one of the most haunting scenes that I've ever seen in cinema in that one, I know it's not about this movie, but whenever the guy jumps overboard with the cannonball and he's looking up at the other guy that's on the ship, the younger, I don't know, lieutenant, but he's looking straight up and it's night. He kills himself essentially, and just watching that, it's shocking. The Core came out in 2003, another campy sci-fi movie which I really like. Just kind of goofy. Yeah, they go to the core of the Earth to restart the magnetic core with nuclear weapons in a big drill, basically, because the sphere around the Earth is going away and everyone's getting melted.
looking at 2003, it's pretty strong. X2 came out, one of my favorite X-Men movies.
Oh yeah.
A lot, like it was a pretty strong year for movies, so it's just unfortunate for any other movie that it came out with Lord of the Rings that just demolished everything in sight from every standpoint. But that's awesome. It's also fun facts about. I keep track of. I'm trying to finish the Oscar Best Picture winners in the IMDb Top 250, and I keep track of the Best Picture winners. Where my personal favorite movie of the year is also the Best Picture winner, has not happened since 2003, and I've seen all the movies since then.
Wow.
I've seen many movies that are in my top 10, but my favorite movie of the year, and it almost happened in 2019. 1917 was my favorite film from that year. Blew me away, reminded me of why I love going to the theater so much. Yeah, this is the only movie since 2003 that was my favorite movie of the year.
Yeah, that's almost an entirely different topic, but I think there's a massive disconnect between critics and audiences now.
Yeah, and it depends on the year, right? Like, sometimes like there's movies like this that just critics love it, audiences love it, everyone loves it, but there is a disconnect. There's so many times where the audience will say it's boring, critics will like it, or vice versa. Even critics will be like, "Nah, there's nothing here." I've seen so many movies with bad reviews that I like or love, and so many movies with good reviews that I think are whatever.
Sure.
And it's like it's all about how we perceive it and what we're looking for in a movie. Those are the two biggest things, I think. And for me personally, like watching older movies can be a little bit of work. I appreciate some classics for sure, but I've always been more into the newer movies just because my attention span's kind of short, to be honest. I do love some classics. 12 Angry Men, It's a Wonderful Life. Those are two of my favorite black and white movies. So yeah, I think it's interesting how there is more of a disconnect nowadays. like 2020 was a weird year for cinema because there were no movies coming out, right? Only the ones that like came out on video on demand were talked about. Um, and
Right.
I did watch those, but it was like it felt like there was a huge like it was a time for streaming to shine, and streaming did. But yeah,
Hmm.
it's interesting because sometimes there have been times where like the Oscars have picked like the big blockbuster. Titanic also won 11 Oscars, and that was definitely a blockbuster movie. And that's not like critics didn't necessarily like love that movie. They liked it a lot, but it happens. It's they don't always go for spectacle, but sometimes they do. Which I love Titanic. I'll just say it on the air. I know people are like rolling their eyes already, but I love it. I love how cheesy it is. I love everything about it.
I enjoy it too. I mean, it's a well-made movie, isn't it? James Cameron.
It is. It
Yeah.
is. Yes.
There you go.
And the visual effects hold up tremendously well in that movie. I mean, it's from 1997. I you see the Titanic and you're like, yeah, that's the boat. That's not visual effects, you know.
Hmm.
For sure.
He does a very good job there, James Cameron.
And I think, the one comparison with Titanic to Lord of the Rings is they're both very long movies, but I truly feel like they earn their runtime. A lot of movies will be like 2.5 hours long, and I would say like half an hour could have been taken out, But with these movies, every minute is earned. And when I'm watching it, it doesn't feel like it's been 3 hours or however long it is because I'm so invested in the story. So I think there's an art to making a good long movie, and usually they have to be kind of epic in scope for it to be like truly engaging.
Right.
Okay,
No,
cool.
I agree.
So one more question we like to ask people on the show. It's kind of a hard question because you're talking about a movie you love, but is there anything in the movie you would change to improve it, or do you see it as perfect in your eyes? And both are good answers.
I'd maybe replace one of the actors possibly. I can't remember her name off the top of my head here, but the daughter of Theoden, who's the of the Rohirrim and the Rohan, it's his daughter. She does a pretty good job, but some of the, I don't know, it just comes off a little off to me. Maybe it's just because I don't know. She's not a bad character. I like what the part that she holds in the story and ultimately takes down the Witch King of Angmar. It's a great scene. The line delivery just to me felt a little off, but that's probably just being super picky. I appreciate the actor, appreciate the work, and overall, I mean, there's not a lot to change in the movie.
It's also nice to see like how this movie has like female empowerment like that without it being like too overbearing, it's not in your face. It's like she's a character who wants to go into battle, and that's cool, like that's all. That's it.
I could almost do a whole podcast on that. How I think for some great examples of that, Mad Max, awesome
Fury Road,
main
dude.
female. It's because they don't push it in your face, right? It's just there, and it's like, okay, yeah, I'm just gonna accept this character, and we're just gonna move on. And it's an awesome movie.
Mad Max Fury Road is incredible. It's so good. And I just watched all the old Mad Maxes, and I was like, sometimes newer is better. Like it blows all of them out of the water. So,
yeah, I bet. I haven't seen the older ones. And another example though is Rogue One. Again, very strong female lead. They don't really flaunt it. Super diverse cast, and it's excellent. It's just an excellent movie.
The problem, at least in what I've seen in movies, is like when they want to make a movie about female empowerment, it's like you don't have to make a strong female character at the expense of the male characters. You don't have to make all the male characters like misogynists or idiots or like, like make them say goofy stuff. Like in Captain Marvel, there's a scene where he's like, you should smile more. And it's like, it's so in your face. And it's like, no, like that's not real female empowerment. I liked the original Wonder Woman a lot more because of that. I thought it was just like, she's a cool character who can like fight and be awesome. Like, I don't know. Like it's just there. It's I think subtlety it speaks way more volumes than like things that are in your face.
Yeah, having a good story and good characters is really what you need. I don't care what the sex of the character is. If it's a good story, I'm gonna watch it.
Edge of Tomorrow. You see Edge of Tomorrow?
Edge of Tomorrow, yeah. She's sort of a main character in it, right? I think Tom Cruise is.
Emily Blunt is like, I think her character is awesome. I mean, A Quiet Place, we got the new one coming out.
Yep.
It's Emily Blunt is awesome. Without going,
You're listing all these movies I love. Yeah,
yeah, all
absolutely.
great
Edge of Tomorrow's
movies.
hilarious too.
So fun, so much fun.
Yeah. Alien and Aliens are some very good
Mm,
examples. That actor, very strong. I think that's a classic example of very strong.
great
But yeah,
movies.
again, just have a good story, and the characters will take it from there.
Yeah.
And
Create a
yeah,
good
that's
character, good character is likable first, and then the rest will follow. If they happen to be,
Yeah, with some true depth and faces. I think that's one of the biggest problems with the new Star Wars movies, unfortunately, excluding Rogue One and the offshoots, right? I think Solo. I haven't actually seen Solo, but
yeah.
one of the
So
biggest
Solo is
issues.
one of my least favorite Star Wars
Oh,
movies. It's
then I'm
not
not
bad.
missing anything.
It's like a filler episode of a good TV show, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. Yeah, the thing is, the issue I think with those movies though is the main character, Ray. She just automatically very good at everything. She can fly well. She's a super and powerful Jedi that knows how to do everything right off the bat. And it's not a believable character, right? And I think that's where I don't know that like you said, it's at the expense of other characters in this case, but it just isn't a well-developed character that
Right.
you can become emotionally invested in, right?
Like, in general,
And,
if any character is just like invincible, like a killing machine, like you're like, okay, what's the danger? Like, I'm gonna give a good counter example to Ray, but in the original Bourne trilogy, like Jason Bourne is very smart. He's extremely, he's on top of his game, right? He knows what he's doing. Have you seen that? Have you seen those movies,
I
Jason Bourne?
have awesome movies. Haven't seen. I need
Um,
to rewatch
yeah,
those.
great. The first three, I mean, stellar action movies, but there's a scene in The Bourne Ultimatum where he fights someone who's like him, right? Like a super soldier or whatever he is. And you feel the humanity in that scene. Like Jason Bourne is not perfect. And that's just one scene that adds tension in the movie. Like, this is a character who, that's why people didn't like the Bourne Legacy with Jeremy Renner, because he's just running around like flawlessly killing everyone, running away, escaping. You don't feel the tension there when a character can just do anything.
Hmm.
And yeah,
Okay.
and it's so funny because we just did an episode on Empire Strikes Back, and my friend who was on that show also mentioned how, like, Ray, and I agreed with him, like Ray just kind of picks up on things, knows what she's doing, doesn't need the training or anything. She's just a Jedi kind of overnight, and it's just like you don't really buy it because you know what it takes to be a Jedi. You watch Luke train with Yoda, you watch to some extent Anakin train with Obi-Wan. You just don't feel it in those movies.
Hmm. Yeah. No, agreed.
But for me, this movie, at least the extended version, which was the only one I've seen,
Hmm.
I find it hard to find change. What's your take on the whole thing about like the Eagles picking them up and how they could have ridden the Eagles the whole way?
Yeah, bit of an issue. I wonder if that was in the original books. I feel like they're pretty powerful characters, even in the Hobbit movies. I think.
Mhm.
I mean, it's interesting. I feel like without having the eye focused on what was going on, of course, at that point the eye was destroyed whenever the Eagles come and pick them up off the rocks. I think it would have seen them coming. I feel like it could have probably staged
That's true.
the Nazgul. This is a question for you. I wonder, is the Nazgul, there's the group of 9, right? But I wonder what their
Um,
mounts are called. He says never come between a Nazgul and its prey. And I'm wondering,
mhm.
I remember then it gets its head chopped off, but that's
Yeah,
always confused me. But anyway,
maybe
I feel
I
like he
think
would have,
I can see what you're saying. Like they're on foot because they're harder to detect that way. Like
and
if
it's
they're just
not
in
what
the
you would
air, like,
expect.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
actually probably the best justification for it.
right. Arrows. I mean, he could have mounted a ton of archers around the mountain.
Yeah, I mean, if those eagles get shot down, like Frodo and Sam are gonna die. Like it's
Yeah.
just there's no way they're gonna survive the fall. So I looking back, I always like discussing these like quote unquote plot holes with people. Titanic, another one. James Cameron has said like the thing would not stay afloat if they both sat on it. That's like a big
No.
one. Like they
Oh
both could
yeah.
have fit. Like it's like no, because that's not how physics works. But you know,
Yeah.
and then they're just ignoring all the poetry of the scene.
Sure.
He's giving
Yeah, I
his,
think there's a
yeah.
no, agreed.
Cool, but I think Two Towers and Return of the King are my two favorites in the series. I think this is a movie that earns the word epic, and if you're a fan of the fantasy genre, you've already seen this movie for sure. And if you haven't, like, you're in for a treat because it's one of the best series of all time. It's the best of the trilogy, which cannot be said for most third movies. And I just think, I don't see any flaws in it personally. I could nitpick, but I mean, in general, it's a 10 out of 10 movie.
Oh yeah, and my nitpicking was definitely nitpicking.
Right.
Overall.
I mean, the question is posed that way to make you nitpick, so no
Sure.
worries.
Yeah, no, definitely. But like you said, some very strong female characters in that for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, great series overall.
Yeah. Cool. So last question before we do the conclusion is, if you had to convince someone to watch this movie, what would you tell them?
I'd say that the movie has a little bit of everything and does it all very well. And it'll provide quite a bit of entertainment. It'll grip you from the get-go. If you liked Game of Thrones, I almost forgot the name. If you like Game of Thrones, it's not. I wouldn't even say it's really the same thing. In fact, it's a lot more clean of a grouping of movies, really, of a trilogy.
Not watch Game of Thrones with your family. You can watch these with your family.
But it's the same type of kind of that feel, I guess. But it's very good. And it has characters that have a real, you can get behind them because they're moral. That's the biggest issue for me with Game of Thrones, is I have a hard time being invested in any character but Jon Snow because they're all kind of evil. So there's excellent characters, clear defining between
every
good
character
and evil.
on Game of Thrones has like some kind of an agenda. So
greatest epic series, greatest epic fantasy trilogy of all time, in my opinion. That's what I'd probably say in one sentence to be more concise.
Absolutely. I mean, I would say, like, this is literally, first of all, one of the most successful movies of all time in every aspect: awards, audiences, box office, you name it, it's successful. I would say it definitely helps to like the fantasy genre at least a little bit if you're going to watch this series. But even then, I think it's worth experiencing at least once, even if it's not your thing. Like you said, there's characters you really care about. They're fully developed. There's conflict that really, puts you on the edge of your seat. And there's also just, I think, like you said, the characters have morals. They're great themes that everyone can learn from. They're universal. They're not limited to any one audience. Anyone in any age group, as long as they're not too scared when they're young, can watch this movie and like take away something from it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's probably what I would say. Just one of the towering achievements of cinema, to put it lightly. But
yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of 3 movies to win 11 Oscars, which is outstanding for a fantasy movie. So
no doubt.
This day does not belong to one man, but to all. Let us together rebuild this world, that we may share in the days of peace.
With that, we have reached the end of today's discussion on Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King. I wanted to thank Jonathan for joining us today.
Happy to be here. Really enjoyed it, Yash. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We were happy to have you too. And from all of us at Cinema Convos, thanks to all of you for listening. If you enjoy our show, give us a follow on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to stay up to date on new episodes. And we hope you tune in next time.